Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking about all sorts of things, actually. But before we really get into it, smash that like button, make sure you're still subscribed, and as always, leave us a comment. That helps us out on our end with the YouTube algorithm, but more importantly, we love hearing from you guys. We've got an awesome community here, and it's all thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, all that said, let's dive in. So, I've mentioned previously on the podcast that I'm a huge fan of the Transformers, the 80s incarnation of the Transformers. And when Facebook first hit and it was first a thing, I went through the credits at the end of Transformers the movie. And literally, I tried to look up everybody who was mentioned in those credits and send them a friend request. And one of the guys who accepted my friend request was Paul Eiding, who's very active with the fans. Um, he has become a sort of one of, I think, a fan favorite in terms of the various voice actors. Um, and so he and I became actual friends. So, for instance, at one point he went to New Zealand for a convention, and while he was there, he visited the Shire from Lord of the Rings, and he tagged my wife in that post because my wife is really short, and he said, "Hey, I found your people," referring to hobbits. So that's kind of the level that we're on, right? Like we get along, and so one day I can't remember how exactly it went down, but I was kind of complaining about modern cartoons. And I was saying something along the lines of like, they just don't make them like they used to. I miss this stuff from my childhood, da 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 da. Pretty common complaint, really, right? But so Paul Eiding chimes in and he's like, hey, I work on modern cartoons. I'm not retired or anything. And so I was asking him, what are you doing these days? And he said, Ben 10. And as a Transformers collector, I'd been in the toy aisle, Toys R Us, and I had seen some Ben 10 toys around, but I didn't really know what it was. And I'm just going to be brutally honest. I think it's in my nature that if I see something geared towards a younger audience after I am a grown man, you know what I mean? There's a certain amount of like inherent dislike that I have as my reaction to that thing. You know what I mean? And mind you, when I was a kid, the popular stuff was like Transformers and G.I. Joe and Thundercats and He-Man and all that jazz. And guys who were older than me, like some of them were customers at my comic book store, some of them were playing our role-playing game. Those guys hated that stuff for the most part. So I get it. That's just something about human nature, right? So I had no love for Ben 10 at that point. But so Paul Eiding tells me he plays a character named Grandpa Max, who's kind of an old man in a Hawaiian shirt who's overweight, which is funny because these days I'm an old man in a Hawaiian shirt who's overweight. But so he starts telling me about the show and he says, we put a lot of work into this show and we're like really proud of it. And he's like, everybody who works on the show is like a nice guy and so on and so forth. And actually through him, I started to send friend requests out to other people who worked on the show. I'm really embarrassed to say this. I can't think of the girl who was the voice of Gwen. Um, but I became friends with her on Facebook. I actually remember when she got married because she was way older than the character. The character's supposed to be 10, but the actress was like in her 20s or something. But at any rate, it turns out the writers and stuff like that, a lot of them were fans of comic books growing up. And one of the big inspirations for Ben 10 had been this old DC comic called Dial H for Hero. and there was a young boy in that. I want to say his name was Robbie Reed, and he gets this alien gadget called the H dial, and it kind of looked like an old like a rotary phone kind of thing. And then all of the circles going around this sort of larger circle had the various letters of the alphabet. So, for instance, the way the H dial worked is if you dialed, let's say, Superman, it would turn you into Superman for however long. I don't know how long it lasted, if it was like a minute or an hour or what. But then once you had dialed Superman, you can never be Superman again. You know what I mean? And so that was Dial H for Hero. So the other thing that the writers and stuff, the showrunners were really into was classic Spider-Man. They really liked Peter Parker. They really liked how, he's not just inherently good at the job from day one. Um, Things don't always go his way, you know what I mean? And so they mashed up these concepts, and that was basically what Ben 10 was. And so the more I kind of heard about it, the more I understood what they were saying, And at the same time, I had gone to art school. I wanted to create something. I would love to have my own cartoon and action figures and stuff. And I thought, man, I'm being kind of hard on these guys for doing exactly what I wish I was doing. So I decided to give them a chance. And I remember Paul Heiting saying, let me know what you think of it. By all means, check it out. And so at the time, we lived really close, kind of diagonal from the public library. So me and my kids just walked over there one day, and sure enough, they had like every episode of Ben 10 ever on DVD. So we took it back to the house and watched it, and my kids loved it. And I've kind of mentioned this before. Like growing up, I was not a fan of the Adam West Batman, but my kids loved it so much, it kind of made me a fan because I was sort of seeing it through their eyes, and they don't see the flaws. They're very forgiving of any of that. Um, and so it was kind of the same way with Ben 10. And so I was watching it with my kids, and I've kind of mentioned this before too. My kids are about a year apart, but they were always the same size. My daughter was kind of big for her age. My son was a little small for his age. Everybody always thought they were twins. And I've also kind of mentioned before, my kids would sort of squabble and bicker, a lot, typical brother sister stuff. Well, so that's exactly the behavior you would see on the show. And there was a little boy and a little girl. The boy is Ben. He's on the cartoon, he's the main character. And they're not siblings, they're cousins, but I mean, it was the same energy. You know what I mean? They for sure acted like a brother and sister who were fighting constantly. And like my daughter loved Gwen Tennyson. And Gwen, the fictional character of Gwen is kind of hard to explain. Um, I guess I'll put it this way. My daughter was always mischievous. She was an ornery kid. Um, she was always trying to get away with something. And at any rate, I think that she was seeing a little bit of that in the Gwen character because when Gwen is talking to Ben, she always refers to him as a dweeb. She's always kind of teasing him. She's always kind of has like a smirk on her face or something like that. She was not, how do I want to put this? Like she wasn't a damsel in distress, or she wasn't a two-dimensional character. Um, so at any rate, like my daughter loved this show. She was so into it. And the one thing she didn't like though was that Ben gets to be the hero, and at least initially, Gwen is kind of along for the ride. But I mean, I will say this. There's something about the Ben 10 cartoon that reminds me of Inspector Gadget. Let me explain. So on Inspector Gadget, I feel like probably a lot of people know this, but there could be someone listening who doesn't know. Inspector Gadget himself is kind of bumbling and bad at his job and so on and so forth. And then Penny, his niece, is very, very smart. She tends to figure things out and, stuff like that, right? There's an aspect of that going on with Ben 10, where to me, Gwen seems like she's probably going to grow up and be a genius, of some sort. Ben is not. Ben, to me, I'm not saying he's an idiot or anything, but like he's more of kind of just a normal little boy. So when he has this alien gadget that looks kind of like a watch, it's pictured here in the art for this episode. When he has the watch on, that's sort of giving him, for the most part, like physical traits. So then Gwen is like she seems older than she is, and she seems like smart, like she's figuring it out. So it almost, what else would it remind me of? It would remind me a little bit of like a Batman Beyond, how Terry McGinnis is in the bat suit and he's out there actually doing stuff, but then he can hear the voice of Bruce Wayne in his ear, kind of telling him what to do. There's a little bit of that, right? Um, so it's not like Gwen is useless, but when my daughter was watching the show, she was really frustrated that she wanted Gwen to have the watch. You know what I mean? And my son was he liked the show, but not as much as she did. So at any rate, we put him into the role-playing game. And they totally seem like comic book characters. Um, and then in our version, because my daughter was so into it, we let Gwen have the watch. So instead of it being Ben 10, our version was Gwen 10. And then they even did an episode called Gwen 10 that was like a what if, that was like another dimension or another timeline or whatever in the continuity of the show where Gwen had the watch instead of Ben. And they showed you how that worked out. And Gwen is actually, in my opinion, much more dangerous because, like I said, Ben kind of needs a little guidance or he kind of needs advice or whatever. And Gwen is sort of the genius that figures stuff out. Well, when you just give her the watch, you sort of eliminate the middleman there. You know what I mean? And then she's like an extremely competent hero. So that was what we ended up doing in the game. And my kids played those characters for quite a while. And I can't remember, I think it was basically when My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, when that show came out, which I couldn't tell you what year it was. Um, I think my daughter kind of lost interest in everything else, and she was just all in on the ponies. That tends to be how she is like she can kind of only love one franchise at a time. And when the next thing comes along that she loves, she just kind of drops everything else and she gravitates towards the new thing. Um, these days, I think her thing is My Hero Academia. And she loves, those characters, Deku and All Might and all that stuff. So maybe I'll have to do a video about that. But at any rate, um, yeah, I didn't want to pass the year when Ben 10 came out and not give a shout out to it. And I can't remember if I said this already or not, but for me, when Ben 10 came out, it was not a great time to be a comic book fan. There were a lot of problems with the industry back then. And so I thought Ben 10 was actually a breath of fresh air. And I know I got a lot of guys my age who listen to the podcast. Um, if by chance you didn't have kids or something, and you that were into the show that was maybe causing you to watch the show or whatever, if you're someone who's never watched it, um, check out season one. And then like they've had multiple iterations of Ben 10 over the years. I'm not singing the praises of all of them, by no means. I actually think they kind of go off the rails after a while, but watch season one of the original show and see what you think of it. And let me know in the comments section. I'd be curious. I'd be very curious to see what people thought of it. And then if you're already a fan of Ben 10, uh, tell me about that in the comments section. Or maybe you've put the characters into a role-playing game of your own. I'd be into hearing about that too. But yeah, whatever you do, leave a comment, smash that like button, and check to make sure you're still subscribed because YouTube unsubscribes people all the time without telling them. It's very annoying. But yeah, that's it for me for today. Thank you guys for listening from everybody here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on earth. We hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.